Oh, somebody just popped into my ears. We have breaking news a minute and a half into me. And that breaking news is Bryce Young will not be playing in the preseason opener on Thursday for the Carolina Panthers. Thank you very much to Graham Hill and here at 99.9 The Fan, our very own Dennis Cox, who presented that information. Not playing in the preseason. Let me cover my bases here, okay? Because we were going to talk just so you know, I'm going to have to leave you hanging on the mullet story.
Yeah, now you're really throwing off the typical vibes of the Adam Gold Show.
I'm going to have to leave you hanging on the mullet story because I want to focus in on this a little bit here. We can come back to the mullet story. I'm going to cover my bases. There are a few ways where I think, and when I say a few, I mean two. There are a couple ways in which I think Bryce Young not playing in Thursday's preseason game makes sense. And I'm not saying we have to be given this information, but this is where I think him not playing makes sense. If A, he's dealing with any kind of an owie, a boo-boo, right? An ouchie. Sorry, I have a 3-year-old at home. I talk like I'm talking to a toddler when it comes to injuries.
I'm also producing, so it works out.
If he has a stinger, if he has a blister on a hand, it doesn't have to take much. But if he is already hurt and you don't want to put him out there, that's fine. Right. In the regular season, there's the difference between hurt and injured. In the preseason, hurt, injured, sore, like it all kind of adds up to the same. And that's if it's a person important to your team, you don't play him. If they're not trying to make the team, you don't play him. The other would be if the offensive line has some injuries, so you don't want to play your first team offensive line. I will, if I can avoid it at all costs, avoid playing my starting quarterback with anything but the best offensive line I can possibly put out on the field. So if I think my quarterback needs reps, guess what? The starting offensive line is getting reps. Even if you're all veterans and the quarterback is the youngster, you're all getting reps. Barring those two things, Bryce Young needs reps. Right? Barring a couple injuries, and you don't have to disclose them, right? If they're small enough, if they're literal like ouchies, you don't have to tell us. But barring that, if that's not true on the inside of that facility, Bryce Young needs reps. And it's not just him out there it's different than a practice rep, right? You might say, oh, well, he gets reps in 7-on-7 or 11-on-11. Yes, but they're not game day reps. There is a difference. Just like there's a difference between the preseason and the regular season. I'm not pretending that you get the exact look you'd get in the regular season and the preseason. I'm also not going to sit here and pretend that practice in the preseason is the same.
I mean, look, I kind of have to call my baby ugly a little bit yesterday just because I was saying, I guess we'll just see what you see is what you get in the season opener for the Carolina Panthers. But to me, that's a disservice to not only Carolina Panthers fans, but to Bryce Young as well. I mean, you don't know what you're going to get if you don't play. So in theory, Bryce Young does need to play, and he just needs to get the in-game reps. Just if it's like, one drive each preseason game. No drives is the worst drives possibly right now for this Carolina Panthers offense.
Here's the way I look at it. And I've said this on air, and I'm going to continue saying this. Last year was a wash for Bryce Young, right? For reasons outside of his control, he really had no opportunity to develop much and no opportunity to have much success. Right, he had an offensive line that was a sieve in front of him. 15 different offensive guards played in front of him. That's absurd. Not to mention Ike Ekwonu not getting it done at left tackle, particularly in pass blocking. He had wide receivers that routinely could not get open outside of Adam Thielen. And when they did, there were oftentimes, I'd call them adventures at the end of the play. Meaning DJ Chark dropping multiple consecutive passes. Meaning Jonathan Mingo. We referenced this yesterday on the air. Jonathan Mingo, when Bryce Young was rolling out of the pocket, threw a pass, jumped before he caught it and almost strained to step outside of the out-of-bounds line in a really weird maneuver. So that was taking place. Like there were adventures at the end of these passes, and they weren't the good kind of adventures. So I will. What I'll say is, I'm treating this upcoming year kind of as Bryce Young's rookie year part 2, right? I'm treating it as last year was a wash. I'm not going to hold it against you, even though you were statistically one of the worst quarterbacks in the NFL.
Right.
But I'm also not going to give you credit for it, right? I'm not going to say, oh, now he's a vet. Now he's a second-year player. Now he doesn't need preseason because he's seen what it's like to play in the NFL last season. To me, last season almost doesn't exist, right? At least that's how I'm going to ask myself. I'm going to try to see this upcoming season for the Panthers and specifically Bryce Young. If last year doesn't exist and this is rookie year part 2, you don't see rookies sit out of preseason.
And I mean, that is a disservice to Bryce Young, too, just because if you listen to a lot of nationwide shows that we have right here on our network, 999 The Fan, it seems like the arrows all point to Bryce Young as the problem for last season, and then the success for this season is all going to be dictated on how well Bryce Young is going to bounce back. And part of that is true. All right, but
yes.
I think outside of the big picture, it also comes down to these new sign-ins. Dave Canales is a head coach. Can he establish a run game? Because he says he wants to get the run game going, but it is fair to point out that during his time with Tampa Bay and Seattle, they didn't have the best run game in the league.
They did not have the most effective or efficient running game. They did stay committed to the running game. And right, the coach would say the reason why our passing game was efficient, especially if you're looking at last year in Tampa where he was calling plays, the reason why Mike Evans had a big year and averaged near the top of the league in yards per catch is because teams had to, whether they were running the ball well or not, expend some of their resources, deploy some of their defensive players up towards the line of scrimmage. So it is a kind of style of play calling, whether it's effective or not, to begin with the run, which I think they will do this year. I think Chuba Hubbard's going to get a lot of carries early on, Miles Sanders spelling him, and then I think it's going to be Chuba Hubbard and Jonathan Brooks and maybe Miles Sanders spelling them, getting a ton of carries as the season moves along once Jonathan Brooks gets healthy. But all of that comes back to Bryce Young needs reps.
Yeah.
Bryce Young's he needs reps, and I'll even go like psychologically, right? Let's go deep into the recesses of our brains for a second here. I think the team needs to see Bryce Young have success. I think it's more likely to happen in the preseason. I think they need to see him throw a long touchdown pass. There were points in time last year where you were too far into the season, and the longest offensive play from scrimmage was like 28 yards. I think they need to see Bryce Young, and I'm not saying they need to see it like, oh, if he did well in the preseason, now we can get behind him. I think it's more subconscious. Right? I think it's more subconscious just to see success and get used to having success on offense and seeing big plays get made. So then, when you see him drop back, you're not going, little internal cringe, right? Those involuntary, instinctual reactions, right now they're not good for Bryce because you haven't seen anything else. Again, not all his fault, right? Offensive line wasn't good enough. Receivers weren't good enough. The play callers were changing seemingly by the week. Right? It was Frank Reich. Then it was Thomas Brown. Then it was back to Frank Reich. Then when he got fired, it was back to Thomas Brown. Like those things. And Josh McCown was his quarterback's coach, and he wasn't his quarterback's coach. Deuce Staley was the running back's coach, and he wasn't the running back's coach. Right? All of those things come into play. So it's not necessarily all his fault, but nobody on that team, unless they played with him at Alabama or played against him in the SEC, has seen Bryce Young play a great football game. They've seen him play good. They've seen him lead game-winning drives twice last year, but they haven't seen him play a great football game. I think they need to see him do that, which is why, and I've said this over the last few weeks, not only would I play Bryce Young, I'd play him a series or two more than the opposing team plays their starting defensive players. Get him a long touchdown drive. I don't care if it's against the twos. Your brain doesn't know that, right? For all my golfers out there, see? Now it's the Adam Gold Show.
There we go.
Now I'm talking
We tied
golf.
it back all together.
Now I'm talking golf. There's a common belief in sports psychology when it comes to golf that your brain doesn't hear no or doesn't hear don't. Sorry, doesn't hear don't. So if you're on the tee and you have to hit it over water onto the green, you shouldn't be saying in your brain, don't hit it in the water. Don't hit it in the water. Because your subconscious brain doesn't recognize don't. So all your subconscious brain hears is hit it in the water, hit it in the water, hit it in the water. So instead, you should think positively, right? You should think like, hit it on the green. Just a different way to think. To me, your subconscious brain doesn't know that those guys out there are the Patriots' backups, right? They see a 50-yard touchdown. They just see a 50-yard touchdown. Your subconscious brain, where it comes to building up that confidence in a player. I do not like, again, barring injuries, barring something we don't know, got to leave yourself that trap door, that escape hatch. Barring that to the offensive line or Bryce, or like the entirety of the receiving core, I do not like him not playing in the preseason, particularly the first game, where if he does tweak something, ankle tweak, whatever, wrist sprain, you have enough time before game one for him to get right.
We do have some fresh sound. Thank you to Dennis Cox for pulling this. Fresh sound to go along with some fresh news. Bryce Young benched for the preseason. It's weird.
Let's not word it that way. He's
not benched, but
they are not playing Bryce Young in the first preseason game. He
bench
is
would
still
be
the
he
starter.
played in the first game, and
bench
would
be he's no longer quarterback one. So it's he's not playing because they don't want him. Like he's lost his spot on the depth chart. He's not benched, but he's not playing on Thursday. Who's the audio from?
This is from head coach Dave Canales discussing why Bryce Young will not play in the preseason opener.
Let's hear
Bryce
from
will
Canales.
not play, okay? And then we'll take that kind of week to week and get a sense for, do we need to get him out there in this system and kind of get a couple of series, and do that. That's something that, I've done in the past. We've done both. So for this game, he will not play.
Interesting. It's interesting. Like, here's the part that is tough for me to wrap my head around. And if you're just tuning in, it's the Adam Gold Show. Tim Donnelly here, sitting in for Adam Gold. The news that broke right about the start of the show, right about noon, is that the Carolina Panthers will not be playing Bryce Young in Thursday's preseason opener. You just heard some audio from Dave Canales where he said they're still deciding on what to do for the next week and the next week. I think this plan should have been hammered out. And maybe it is, and Dave Canales is just playing a little coy. He's playing a little possum with us, and he knows how everything he expects to break. Like, to me, when you are an offensive-minded head coach, hired with pretty much a mandate to figure out a way to make Bryce Young work, right? The reason why Dave Canales is the head coach of the Carolina Panthers is because of his history in the room that helped reclaim the career of Geno Smith, and then his role as the offensive coordinator that turned Baker Mayfield in from the player we saw in Carolina to a player that just signed a $100 million extension. Like, that is why Dave Canales is here. They brought in a bar rescue, only it's like quarterback rescue guy, to help Bryce Young reach his potential. When that is the reason you're there, how is it 2 days before the preseason game and you're still deciding if your quarterback is going to play? Wouldn't that be a plan that you spent hours and hours, days and days, maybe weeks and weeks going over what would be best for Bryce throughout the offseason? And now it's just about staying on track and executing that plan? Now, I'm not saying you can't be fluid and change, right? I'm not saying you can't go, actually, you know what? He needs this or he needs that. Seeing him in training camp, here's what we think. Like, you can pivot, but it shouldn't be you're going back and forth. It should be we have a plan and you're just making a decision whether to deviate from that plan or not.
Well, talk about staying consistent. Tim, as someone who played quarterback, maybe you can answer this question. Does this throw off your routine a little bit if you're Bryce Young after having 4 days of practice? They're going to take tomorrow off, I believe, to travel up to New England. But now he has to sit an extra 2 days now between practice and then not playing at all Thursday night. Does that throw you off a little bit as a QB?
No. The preseason is always kind of wonky. Once you get into the regular season where every Monday is the same, every Tuesday is the same, every Wednesday, then if suddenly you're getting thrown off, right, like a Thursday night game can kind of make it weird for you. Yeah. A Monday night game can kind of make it weird for you. A trip overseas can kind of make it weird for you. In training camp, you don't even know what day it is. You're just showing up wherever the coaches want you to be. So I don't think that's kind of what the decision is. By not playing him, you guarantee yourself no negative effects, right? He's not going to get hurt. Okay, that's the main logic. I don't think you're risking what you said, like throwing off a rhythm if he doesn't get into play, right? He'll be the guy with the earphone in on the sideline talking, like he'll still be engaged.
Get a read of the offense.
But you are also, by taking away every negative effect, you're also taking away really any chance for him to improve, right? He's not going to be more ready week 1 because he didn't play, right? He won't be any less ready than he is right now. You're not risking anything as far as taking steps back, but you're passing up the opportunity to potentially step forward.
Yeah.
All right, go out there, have a great day. Offense looks crisp. Bada boom, bada bang. Now all of a sudden the entire vibe of training camp changes. Bryce Young, second year, that's building up a little momentum. Like that's what you're risking, and I think that's important. Not to mention, and I will say this until I am blue in the face, reps are important to young quarterbacks. And young, like 25 years and younger, and I'll go down to like 7-year-olds. Like reps are important to young quarterbacks. If you are in high school right now and you are maybe a sophomore and the coach approaches you and says, "Hey, you're good enough to be our varsity backup quarterback, where you get to practice with the best kids in school. Or you could go be the starter on JV, where you won't get to wear the varsity uniform. You won't get to walk around on game day with the Letterman's jacket and have everybody go, 'Oh, are you going to the away game at so-and-so high school?' But you'll start on JV and you'll play every game." Pick the reps. Young quarterbacks need reps. Bryce Young last year, again, I'm kind of giving him like the hands off, do what you want move, right? Because last year was so much out of his control that went so wrong. It's also fair to say that he didn't look like a finished product last year, right? It's also fair to say that he didn't look like a guy who's like, "I'm good." You know who actually did look like that at times last year?
Who's that?
CJ Stroud. And guess who's playing in the first preseason game? CJ Stroud.
And who won Offensive Rookie of the Year last season.
And broke a bunch of records and has, is getting Tank Dell back from injury and getting Stephon Diggs out of what was that, a trade, free agency, whatever you want to call it. Joe Mixon is being added to the offense. Like, they're getting vets and getting healthier, and CJ Stroud's still playing. I lean that way over the way that the Panthers are leaning here. Go ahead. One last thing to add.
Well, we do have some more sound from Dave Canales. Again, thank you to Dennis Cox, who's working behind the scenes here to get this in. This is Dave Canales discussing if Bryce Young will get a fair read of the offense while not playing the first preseason opener.
Not the way Jack's been playing. So that's the cool part, is I'm excited about that. And we brought in Jake Luton as well, a guy that's been around a couple of different teams. I was with him in Seattle for a little bit. So a guy that knows how to play football and function, and that's what we really needed to feel good about the evaluation and how important that is, So we brought him in. We're working him into some of the wording. Some of it's the same, a little bit different in some, but we got to make sure our cadence is right so we can just get the play started. And he's really sharp. And so I'm glad he's here, and he's going to give us that ability to evaluate our guys.
Let's talk about that quickly. That's the other part of Bryce Young not playing, is now every other quarterback gets bumped up the depth chart, right? Andy Dalton's already hurt, so he's not playing. Now Bryce Young's not playing. It sounds like from that soundbite, Jack Plummer, need to be clear there. Jack Plummer, not Jake Plummer. Jake Plummer, I think he's got a mushroom farm somewhere in the Midwest right now, but was a long-time NFL quarterback, Jake the Snake. Jack Plummer looks like he'll move into the, and I don't believe they're related, will move into the starting role, and Jake Luton will back him up. That is more difficult to evaluate the rest of your roster.
Yeah, when he was bringing up the comments about evaluating, I was like, we're evaluating Jack Plummer here?
Well, yes. I mean, every time a quarterback steps on the field, you're being evaluated in the NFL. But, like, if you're a wide receiver, say you are trying to, like Emir Smith-Marset, and you kind of feel like you've established yourself as some kind of a returner, but you want a bigger role in the offense. You're out there trying to run routes and get open and have offensive success. If the quarterback can't help you do that, you can't showcase your ability. There is a certain base level of play you need at quarterback in order to know if anyone else is doing their job, right? Quarterback's not seeing it. He's holding the ball for 5 seconds. Offensive line's going to give up a lot of sacks. That's not necessarily their fault, right? Wide receivers, if they walk away with no catches, but they were open a few times and the quarterback misses them, that's not necessarily the wide receiver's fault. I like Jake Luton coming in as their player because he is a guy with NFL experience. He's played in real NFL games. He has experience in Dave Canales' offense, so he's not exactly starting from square zero. He had some experience out there in Seattle. Also played with Carolina last year, so has some experience with the players on the roster. I just don't know how much you can judge the rest of the offense when Jack Plummer is out there. No disrespect to Jack Plummer. He was really good at Louisville, right? We watched a lot of him in the ACC. He was a really good player, but he's an undrafted rookie free agent. Imagine being a wide receiver or a tight end trying to make the team, and you feel like you need to open some eyes in the first preseason game. Especially knowing the Panthers have the first waiver pick because they finished dead last year, which means when cuts start happening on other teams, the Panthers get first pick of all of those guys to add to their roster. So the end of the Panthers roster is on shaky ground because you're competing against everybody that gets cut from every other team in the NFL. You feel like you got to make a splash. You went from playing with maybe Andy Dalton or heck, maybe even getting some reps with Bryce Young to suddenly you're going, Jake Luton got on our practice field like yesterday, and now I got to be on the same page with him on Thursday.
Yeah, doesn't that throw out the whole consistency and chemistry of the offense right now?
It's a really tough situation for everybody involved to get a true evaluation. Is that wide receiver not making plays, or is that wide receiver not being given the chance to make plays? It's not the easiest thing to discern. Right? Was their timing off, or was the quarterback's timing off?
Yeah.
But I do like the Luton hire. I just think, or hire, that's a weird way to put it, signing, because I think with knowing Andy Dalton's going to be back in a week and a half, whatever it's going to be, you didn't want to bring in Ryan Tannehill or some of these other bigger names that were available because you don't have to. But you did need somebody that's an NFL quarterback for all of the reasons we just mentioned. So Luton kind of threads that needle nicely and has some experience with Dave Canales' offense. I just don't think I'd like to put as much responsibility preseason week 1 on his plate as it looks like they're going to do. That seems a little aggressive to me.